First, I'd like to point out that I do not claim to be any sort of reference for correct pronunciations of any names or non-English words. I am but a humble scholar of the myths, and recommend you listen to a fluent speaker for guidance on pronunciations, as I often pronounce things wrong. The information I have to convey is valuable nonetheless, as I hope you will see. Secondly, I've been trying to show how many Celtic deities actually do have one-to-one cognates in other branches, rather than falling back on mixing gods together like I'm making some kind of stew, and ending up with a vague mess and nothing really clarified. Generally, when you see someone doing that sort of thing, they haven't really seen or understood the gods clearly enough. That being said, sometimes this sort of composite comparison does seem necessary, and it can be worth considering in rare cases, as long as the individual myths are sorted very carefully and a crystal clear argument is made for the composite. This is the case of the Dagda, who appears to be mainly the wind god, the Vedic Vayu, yet he also has several myths that, as far as I can tell, have no other explanation than that they come from the archaic Father Sky mythos. We will explore these two comparisons, taking as much care as possible to sort them precisely. To begin with, the Dagda's Father Sky attributes seem to relate mostly to who his children are, and we must recognize that familial relationships may shift and change between mythological branches somewhat more than specific narrative myths do. And so the Dagda, having the children we would expect Father Sky to have, shouldn't be too surprising, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the Dagda is only Father Sky. Like Dyaus, the Vedic Father Sky, the Dagda is father of one form of the fire god, that is, Aidh, with Mannanan being the celestial form of fire, and Mannanan also being called a foster son of the Dagda. The Dagda is also father of the dawn goddess, Brigid, as Dyaus is father of the dawn goddess, Ushas. And lastly, the Dagda is father of Aengus, who mythically parallels the twin sons of Dyaus, called the Ashvins, as we can see from the great lunar cycle of myths, which I have analyzed in my articles. At one point, the Dagda cries tears of blood for his dead son, and this appears to be a motif archaically belonging to the Indo-European Father Sky, since Zeus cries tears of blood for his dead son Sarpedon, incarnation of Father Sky, and the figure who, in my view, is actually the Father Sky of Iranic tradition, Gaiomard, cries tears of blood for his dead son as well. This last version appears only in one translation that I have read, but I am assuming for the moment that the translator didn't make it up wholesale. In fact, both the Dagda and the wind god Vayu have a son who is killed for some great transgression, and then restored to life after their father grieves powerfully for them. For the Dagda, this son is Kermit, Milbel. For Vayu, it is Hanuman. Hanuman is killed by Indra for trying to take the sun, and his father, Vayu, then withdraws dejectedly from the world, causing great suffering to all beings by his absence. Vayu finally returns when Shiva decides to revive Hanuman. Similarly, when Kermit, the son of the Dagda, dies, the Dagda cries tears of blood, travels to the east, where he comes across some dwarves with a magic staff, and in some he takes their staff and then revives his son with it. Thus it is hard to tell if the death of the Dagda's son, Kermit, is a Father Sky or a Vayu myth. The Dagda also punishes the fire thief, Korgend, like Zeus punishes Prometheus. Thus, we might presume that this was an archaic Father Sky myth as well. Now, in the Irish version, the theft of fire is told as the killing of the god named Fire, Aidh, and burying him in a round grave, thus a fire shrine. That is, the bringing of fire down to earth and placing it in a shrine there. This is the same underlying myth as the Prometheus myth, as I may explain in a future video. And the Dagda is here in the same position as Zeus, thus giving the Dagda another possible point in the Father Sky column. The Dagda also takes a long time to die, multiple decades even, after being struck with a poisoned dart in the Second Battle of Moytura. This may be similar to the incarnation of Vayu-Dyaus, Bhishma, taking a notably long time to die in the Mahabharata, slowly expiring from his mortal battle wound while he gives his lengthy advice on dharma and kingship. This may again find some resonance with the relatively slow death of Sarpedon, the incarnation of Father Sky in the Iliad, who parallels Bhishma. These are then the primary verifiable Father Sky myths that I have recognized in the Dagda. Of course, the Dagda's grandsons, Mac Quill, Mac Grania, and Mac Cecht, are who I see as the triple form of the primordial Father Sky proper. Because their triple marriage to Eriu and her two sisters is the cryptic marriage of Earth, Ireland, and Sky, divided by the Rudraic god Eivir Fin in the creation myth. The fact that these three brothers, making the triple primordial Father Sky, are the grandsons of the Dagda, may hint at why they have the main Father Sky mythos, while the Dagda has some of the other Father Sky roles. It also raises the enormous question of what comes first, the primordial cosmic wind or air, that is, the Dagda, or the primordial sky, his grandsons, and in what way do they overlap or even give rise to one another? Or, since the creation myth seems to have been moved later in the myth cycle by the scribes or bards, were these grandsons ever born earlier in the mythic genealogy in the archaic form of the myths? Has any of this genealogy been changed or shifted around? For myself, the combination of Father Sky and Vayu or wind god traits in the Dagda is one of the larger mysteries of Celtic myth. But there is also some straightforward logic to why sky and air/wind might overlap. Nonetheless, the Dagda's primary mythos seems far more wind or Vayu-centric than Father Sky-centric, especially since it is not the Dagda who has the most important Father Sky myth, that of being divided from the earth goddess by the Rudraic god in the creation myth, as the Vayu-Dyaus is similarly attacked and divided from the rape of his daughter or female other half by Rudra Agni in Rig Veda 1.71.5 through 8 and Rig Veda 10.61. So, if the Dagda isn't divided from Earth in the primordial moment or at any other time, how can he be the primordial Father Sky God? The most pertinent wind god traits of the Dagda can then be briefly listed. The Dagda has the Lorg Anud, which translates to staff of strong breeze, more or less. This has led to it often being translated as stormy or wrathful staff, which may be half true, but the word's etymology is more directly connected to breeze or blowing. Hence, in modern Gaelic, Anud can mean either stormy or breath power. The Dagda uses this staff of blowing or breeze to clear the floodwaters of the plain of Myrthevne, meaning obscure sea, and to kill the water monster there, thus drying the land after a flood. This event points to the power of wind as the Dagda's most central power, drying the land with a staff of breeze. And as we will see, this staff of breeze seems to also give and take life breath being another domain specifically belonging to the wind god, Vayu. This resonates once again with the word anud, being connected to the blowing or breath power. The Dagda has a comically large appetite and large stature, and he once eats a massive pit full of food along with the gravel at the bottom. Similarly, the wind god's incarnation, Bhima, is the largest and strongest of all the god incarnations, reflecting the traits of Vayu. He has a comically large appetite, greater than that of all his brothers combined, and due to this trait has the nickname Vrikodara, wolf-bellied. In the end of the Mahabharata, one of the reasons Bhima is said to fall dead before reaching paradise is his excessive appetite. Thus it is his characteristic trait. And I should add that Georges Dumézil pointed out the large stature, strength, and comically large appetite as the signature traits of the wind god type in Indo-European mythology. The Dagda also has an iron club weapon, Lorg Iarnada, matching the description of Bhima's signature weapon, his Sakya iron club. The Dagda is a cook like Bhima and has a great cooking pot, mentioned in the tale called The Dagda, retold in Lady Gregory's Gods and Fighting Men. The Dagda, lord of the burial mound Brunaboynia and taker of life, is apparently also an underworld god, and likewise the Iranic version of Vayu, often called Y, W-A-Y, is one of the primary underworld gods. As mentioned, the Dagda's staff gives and takes life, which directly parallels the two sides of the Iranic Y. This Y is divided into the good and bad Y, one giving and the other taking life breath. We can see that this dividing of Y into good and bad is just a variant of the Dagda having the staff that gives life with one end and takes it with the other. Or rather, gives life breath with one end and takes it with the other. Perhaps calling the Dagda the good god, then, is a way of propitiating his good side, like the good Y, as sometimes happens with gods who have beneficial and frightening sides. People end up preferring to call them by their kind name in hopes the god will act in that kind or auspicious manner to them. The Dagda is a chief of the musicians and famous for his harp-like instrument, while Vayu is chief of the celestial musicians, the Gandharvas, according to the Puranas. I believe that the Dagda's brother, Oma, is a parallel of one of the main Gandharvas, thus preserving the close relationship between wind god and Gandharva. One of the names of this stringed instrument of the Dagdas is the four-angled music. Meanwhile, Vayu is called the controller of the directions in the Bhagavata Purana. And the four cardinal directions, along with the four winds, could connect to the meaning of the Dagda's four-angled music, which also sets the seasons in order. The Dagda acts as an envoy in the Second Battle of Moytura, and Vayu is one of the messengers of the gods due to his great speed. The Dagda's trait of digging massive trenches and clearing land and leaving footprints on every stone would then reflect the power of the wind to shape land. Several of his names also invite wind-related interpretations. I will not attempt to pronounce these, but Isolde Carmody translates four of them as talkative hen on the hill, large-lapped farter, great lying bag, and cutting mountains. Now what god can you call a farter or a lying bag without sacrilege, besides the wind god? As for cutting mountains, both Vayu and his incarnation actually cut the top off or uproot mountains in their myths. What else cuts mountains besides wind? Vayu is the first to the Soma sacrifice due to his great speed, and he keeps a special reserve of Amrita, divine nectar, for himself stored up in his home. Rigveda 10.186, verse 2-3 says, "Thou art our father, Vata," a name of Vayu. "Yea, thou art a brother and a friend. So give us strength that we may live. The store of Amrita, laid away yonder, O Vata, in thine home. Give us thereof that we may live." Meanwhile, the Dagda has his magic cauldron that never goes dry, from which he is able to give sustenance. Perhaps also connected to this cauldron of plenty, Vayu is said to put the milk into cows and is depicted as having a goad with which he spurs animals to plow fields. This goading role, along with the role of the wind in spreading seeds, may explain why the Dagda is considered a god of agriculture and of the earth. Indeed, it is said in Rigveda 1.135 that for Vayu, quote, "never shall the cows be dry," unquote, while the Dagda's cauldron is called the undry or never dry cauldron. Vayu is called embryo or germ of the world in the Rig Veda, while another of the Dagda's epithets is translated by Karmody as the regeneration of the world of dry land. The Upanishads say that Vayu, as the god of life breath or prana, is that god which must be known in order to reach the Brahman, the Absolute. In this sense, perhaps we may understand why the Dagda is called at the same time the large-lapped farter and the Lord of great knowledge, a god of comical appetite, music, and druidic mastery at once. The wind is the tiller of the earth, and the spreader of seed, and the one who gives and takes life breath. The wind god is a central underworld god in Iranic sources, as the Dagda also seems to be an important underworld god. What is the connection between being inventor of several types of music with his harp, the giving and taking of life, the tilling of earth, and the digging of trenches, knowledge, lies, and a staff whose name is connected to breath and breeze, with which the plain of the flood can be dried? The answer is wind. I will now read an encyclopedia entry from Iranica Online, showing how Vayu, or the Iranic Y, or Vayu, was an extremely central underworld deity. Quote, "Vayu is a complex, multifaceted deity. While the depiction of Vayu in Yasht 15 is basically that of a martial deity capable of protecting the creation of Shpenta Mainyu, elsewhere in the Avesta he appears as a feared god of death. In the Pahlavi books, a very clear distinction is made between the good Y, Y-E-We, and the bad Y, Y-E Watar. Further, in the Avesta, he is superior not only to both Shpenta Mainyu, the beneficent spirit, and Angra Mainyu, the evil spirit, but also to Ahura Mazda, who must entreat him for aid. As Philip G. Krayenbroek has shown, ancient Iranians, like their Vedic counterparts, entertained a variety of conceptions regarding creation and the formation of the cosmos. On the basis of the much later Pahlavi sources, one can identify the scenario where there was a primordial condition of infinite space, Vayu, and infinite time, Zurvan, from which the dualities of finite space and time evolved as the requisites of the creation of the world. The close association of space-time is already foreshadowed in the Avesta, where Vayu shares an epithet with Zurvan. Thus in the Si Rozag, Vayu, space, and both infinite time and time of long dominion are invoked together. Indeed, the cosmogonic priority of time became the central thesis of Zurvanite theology during the Parthian and Sassanid periods. See Zainer. In the Bundahisin account of creation, we read, "Between them, Ormazd and Ahriman, was the void. Some call it Y." That is the primordial situation. Later in the account, however, Ormazd created the form of the good Y, since Y was necessary. Some say Y of long dominion. And he fashioned forth the creation with the assistance of Y of long dominion, since when he, Ormazd, created the creation, Y was necessary as an instrument of his for the task. The implication here is that the author of the Bundahisin is attempting to relegate what in another theology, Zurvanite, was Y's creative independence to Ormazd's sovereignty over creation. Martin Schwartz has demonstrated that the duality of the two spirits follows from the basic sense of Indo-Iranian Manu as embracing intense mental activity that can manifest itself either in violence and destruction or in benign creativity. He has suggested that this should be regarded as parallel to the splitting of Vayu, rather than agreeing with Georges Dumézil, who went so far as to see in Zarathustra's two Manus a sublimation of the two Vayus of the inherited pantheon, though this was in the context of his tripartite theory. See also Windengren. Be that as it may, one can suppose that once Vayu as infinite space, above the categories of good and evil, became finite, he split in two. As such, he assumed the part of the benevolent, if at times violent, wind, on the one hand, and that of the evil bringer of death on the other. Vedic Vayu and Avestan Vayu appear to have few common traits. With some exceptions, the former always is invoked together with Indra, and in the context of the ritual is the first to partake of Soma. Yet, as noted by Vikander, in the Indian epic the Mahabharata, Vayu's nature is embodied ambivalently in the person of his human son Bhima, the Terrible, who is loving and protective of his family on the one hand, and brutally violent with foes on the other. So it would seem that the Indo-Iranian deity was regarded with ambivalence as having both a benevolent and malevolent side of his personality. Since Ahura Mazda must request the ability to strike down Angra Mainyu's creatures, Vayu seems to exercise dominion over both creations. This suggests that in some circles, Vayu enjoyed a universality that overshadowed both Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. In fact, H.S. Nyberg imagined that Vayu was the supreme deity of a particular community, just as Ahura Mazda and Mithra also had their respective communities in which they reigned supreme. The idea of rival sectarian communities in pre-Zoroastrian Iran has been generally ignored by scholars. In Yasht 15 of the Avesta, a picture of Vayu's nature can be painted mostly on the basis of his various epithets. His standing epithet is Uparo Kairya, having superior skill. He is strong, swift, and fleet. In appearance he is broad-chested, broad-hipped, high-stepping, and high-girdled, with golden helmet, cape, and coins, necklace, vestment, shoes, and girdle. He is a warrior who has a golden chariot with golden wheels, whose yoke straps are firm. His weapons are golden, and he has a sharp spear, whose blade is broad, and whose thrusts are impetuous. Although Yasht 15 paints a picture of a mighty benevolent deity who protects the creation of Spenta Mainyu and who hearkens to the entreaties of Ashavans, there is the malevolent side of his nature that is only hinted at in the Yasht, but which has explicit expression in the Vendidad, Nyayisen, and Iogamedaika. Vendidad 5.8 and 5.9, speaking of a dying man, say, Vayu leads him bound. The Pahlavi gloss follows word for word the Avestan. Some say the good Y bears them all. Apparently, the commentator wished to distinguish, as we shall see, the bad Y who leads away the soul, while the good Y carries the righteous soul to heaven. The Bundahisin makes a related statement. It is Astwihad, the demon of death, the bad Y, who takes the breath soul. As he says, when his hand strokes a man, it is lethargy. When he casts his shadow, it is fever. When he sees his eye, he slays the breath soul, and they call this death. Verses 78 to 81 of the Auge Madaika list paths of dire circumstances which one can escape, but not that which belongs to merciless Vayu, meaning that death is inescapable. There are indications in Yasht 15 that lurking behind the Ashavan Vayu is a sinister Vayu. When Ahura Mazda entreats Vayu, the boon he asks for is that I may strike down the creatures of Angra Mainyu, by no means what belongs to Shpenta Mainyu. And when the worshippers invoke Vayu, it is with the formula, we worship that nature of thine, O Vayu, which belongs to Shpenta Mainyu, meaning the good Y. And when the soul, Gyan, of the righteous cross the Sinvat bridge, the good Y takes his hand and brings him to his proper place. One calls him Ram, for the reason that he is the giver of pleasure to the whole world. But when the bad Y strikes the life breath from the body, this good Y receives it and gives it contentment. Taliesin 26.29 through 30. End quote. Reading this description should very clearly remind us of the nature of the Dagda in his underworld aspect, and his power to give and take the life breath with his staff of strong breeze or blowing. My book, Taliesin's Map, The Comparative Guide to Celtic Mythology, is available from Amazon. Link in the description.